More use of force by Israeli police on the streets of occupied East Jerusalem. Outside the district court, protesters were shoved and moved behind a security barrier. Inside, the court heard the case of 6 families living in 2 houses under threat of forced expulsion from their homes in the nearby Silwan neighbourhood. Israeli settlers say Jews own the property pre the creation of the State of Israel, and since the state came into being, previous property rights are null and void. The judge postponed the hearing, saying he would seek further legal advice. The lawyer for the family says despite the fact that Palestinians have little faith in the legal system, representation in Israeli courts is crucial.
We don't have the luxury to engage in as lawyers. We have families. The families are at risk of eviction. We wish we had an international tribunal that we could go to and ask that international tribunal to adjudicate the case. But since the cases are being filed to Israeli courts, we cannot leave this field without any response from our side.
Outside the court, the protesters made clear they see the forced expulsions as illegal.
So as you can see, emotions are very high right now. The police have moved the protesters behind that barrier, and just take a look at the signs. Humanity takes precedence over all limits. The message really here is that these discriminatory laws need to be gotten rid of, and Palestinians need rights.
This is Silwan and the neighbourhood that's at the centre of the court case. Kayed is a member of one of the families fighting to keep their home. They were forced out by the State of Israel from their home in the Old City in 1965 and were rehoused here. He can't file a court case to get his old home back, and now he might lose this one.
I
don't believe in the Israeli legal system because in 1967 our house was confiscated in the Old City. If there's any justice in the courts, they should return that home to us. When the settlers come, our life becomes miserable. They arrest our kids, they harass our women and our elders, and life is just hard.
All of the houses on this narrow street are under threat. The court postponement has brought them some breathing space, and they can remain for now. But for how long, those who live here don't know. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera, Silwan, occupied East Jerusalem.
Well, Shahd Qaddura is a legal researcher and advocacy officer for Al-Haq organization, a Palestinian human rights group. She joins us from Ramallah. Good to have you with us. So let me present to you the Israeli narrative. When I've spoken with Israeli officials, they say these sorts of legal decisions about expulsions, they are purely legal matters decided by courts based on evidence. They are not political decisions made with a political agenda. Do you agree?
Hello, and thank you for having me today. Now, of course, I wouldn't agree. That is a rhetoric used by a colonizer, by an apartheid regime. And I think you wouldn't expect less from an occupier and from an apartheid regime. Now, let me just highlight that the legal framework applicable in the occupied West Bank is international humanitarian law and is international human rights law. Now, following its occupation of East Jerusalem in 1967 and its unlawful annexing of East Jerusalem, Israel has extended its application of its own domestic legislation to the territory it occupies. And as such, it further displaced the Palestinian people and it further enriched the appropriation of their property. Now, to cement the Palestinian dispossession and displacement in Jerusalem, Israel enacted the Legal Administrative Matters Law in 1970. And this law exclusively allows Jews to pursue claims to land and property allegedly owned by Jews in East Jerusalem before the establishment of State of Israel. So while these laws might be the legal system in Israel, the mere fact that they're being applied in an occupied Palestinian territory is unlawful under international law, is illegal. The mere fact that Israel is annexing and has annexed East Jerusalem is illegal under international law.
Right, but it's not. Let me jump in here. It seems it's not just the application of Israeli law, but Israeli law itself, which has come under criticism by organizations like yours, I noticed you used the word apartheid to describe it. That word was used by Beit Salem, an Israeli human rights organization. It was also used in a report in April by Human Rights Watch. Explain to viewers what the allegation that Israeli law has different standards for Jews and for Palestinians, especially when it comes to things like property transfer, that there is one rule for one and one for the other.
Definitely. And I was coming to that point. So basically, Palestinian civil society organizations have for decades, and along with regional organizations, have highlighted and analyzed Israel's core system. And we've reached out to the conclusion that it is settler colonialism and it is apartheid regime. And of course, we're very glad that other organizations are also addressing this issue now, like B'Tselem, as you mentioned, but also Human Rights Watch. Now, following the establishment of Israel in 1948, Israel has enacted and designed multiple laws and policies that enrich its apartheid regime over the Palestinian people as a whole. And I say over the Palestinian people as a whole because at Al-Haq, we believe that the apartheid regime is not restricted over a geographical area, but rather over the Palestinian people on both sides of the Green Line, but also as refugees living abroad and inside. So going back to my point, in 1950...
Shahid, if we can get beyond the sort of generalities, in the practical situation for the life of people living there, if a Jewish person wants to transfer property and a Palestinian wants to transfer property, tell us, does the law give them equal rights, or if not, how? Explain how it makes a difference when you want to get building permits, residency permits, when you want to transfer property. How do these things actually work out on the ground for people?
So it's completely two different experiences. For Jewish Israelis, they're allowed to come back to or to return to Israel under the Israeli law. But for Palestinians, including refugees who are few kilometers away from their homes, they're not allowed to go back to their original homes and properties. That in itself, in the simplest way possible, explaining the different Israeli laws that are enacted over Palestinians living inside the Green Line, but also, as I said, in East Jerusalem because of the fact that Israel had annexed and enacted its laws in the occupied territory. So basically, you find two people. One is Jewish and the another is Palestinian. Being exposed and imposed these laws, Palestinians are unable to go back to their homes, whereas Jewish Israelis or Jews in general have the right to return to Israel. And all of this is enabled because of Israel's judicial system, because of Israel's laws and policies, which enacted right after the state of Israel was established.
All right, thank you very much.
Just to give an example.
Okay, very quickly, Shah, because we are out of time. Very briefly.
Very quickly, in 1950, Israel enacted the absentees property law, which basically regulates the property of Palestinians who were abroad or forced to flee during the Nakba. Through defining Palestinians as refugees and displaced persons, this law had assigned their properties for appropriation by the state. These absentees have been denied the right of return under discriminatory nationality and citizenship laws.
Right.
Whereas, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Shahd Qaddura there.